Welcome, Nadia on stage.
So, my name's Nadia EL-Imam. I'm an engineer and designer. I'm also one of the founders of Edge Writers. It's an online community of hackers, activists, artists, engineers, doctors, lawyers. Members share experiences from trying to do things, usually things that are very far outside the mainstream, on an open platform. And we develop collective intelligence tools and technologies so that we can help the members build better and smarter initiatives together. One of the projects, I should probably say that it's, the people come from very different backgrounds, but what they have in common is that we're all experimenting with alternative solutions to systemic crises. And one of the projects that's come out of this collectivity is Open Care. So why care? Why are we obsessed with fixing health and social care, and why now? I'd like to show you a quick snippet. We need the audio.
Should we allow more refugees into the UK than we can cope with, given the housing crisis and the strains on our public services?
Suzanne Evans.
The short answer is no.
So Susanna Evans is a representative of UKIP in the UK. I think they need no further introduction. I would say that a lot of the hostility that we're seeing towards newcomers in our communities comes down to this. It's zero-sum thinking. The notion that one new person in the system to care for means another one that is kicked out. And that person might be us. And so the authoritarians, they manipulate these fears, and they tell you that you don't need to worry about this, because you are you, because you're born here, or because you're white, or whatever. And it doesn't really matter that they can't actually deliver on this promise. It's not credible. It's a very attractive one. The big elephant in the room is that these fears are partly justified. So, spending on healthcare in Europe is growing faster than GDP, which means that at some point it's going to reach over 100%. So we'll be working all the time just to stay alive. And you have aging populations, increasing demands on sophisticated and expensive healthcare, breakdown of the family as a protective structure. All of these trends are challenging the traditional European model of, public, free at point of delivery health and social care. Now, unless the system, if we want the system to cope, we have to make giant increases in efficiency of the health and social care systems. The good news is that we have a formidable source of efficiency gains all around us. It's called collective intelligence. It's the force that powers millions of people every day who don't know one another to build the largest encyclopedia in history. So, with Wikipedia and other projects that harness collective intelligence, what you see under the hood are two things. You have self-selection and social networks. So self-selection means that every individual chooses for themselves how they will contribute, what they will contribute, or rather, if they will contribute, what they will contribute, and when. Social networks mean that information and relationships travel in ways that are fundamentally different from top-down hierarchical structures where you have central command and control. Over time, these kinds of interactions give rise to complex, unpredictable patterns because they're the result of millions and millions of individual decisions, but their efficiency is unparalleled. And every time collective intelligence comes into play, disruption follows. So Wikipedia, it's a tiny organization. And if you think about it, how would you map what millions of people are knowledgeable about and interested in, right? And OpenStreetMap, which is a wiki-style map of the world, it's outcompeted basically, the expensive DVDs that you would use for your GPS navigators in your cars. Forget about it. And Stack Overflow. Massive community, millions of programmers that ask each other, share advice on technical issues, 24/7, 365 days a year for free. And what we see is that where communities care for their members and they do it efficiently, it's the same wiring. Let me show you some examples. So last fall, I visited the Metropolitan Community Clinic outside Athens. It's a clinic that serves people who are falling outside the public healthcare system. Because in Greece, if you lose your job, you no longer have access to the healthcare system within 1 year. So people are losing their lives as well as their jobs. What makes this place special is a number of things. They don't accept cash, right? They don't deal with money. They don't have a legal entity. It's not even an organization. What they do is completely illegal. Everyone who steps in through the door is socialized to be a caregiver as well as a care recipient. The doctors tell people, tomorrow it might be me. I might need help. And they have a time bank that's run by the volunteers so that everyone that comes in and uses the clinic also helps others in a system of mutual support. In 4 years, you've had, this clinic alone has served 40,000 people. And there are 68 of these clinics in Greece alone. So in 4 years, they've built a shadow healthcare system that serves the maybe 10% of the Greek population that doesn't have access to the public healthcare service. And they do this with no central command, no top-down control, no legal structure, and no money. This is the longest-standing internet learning center in the UK. It started out with a decline of, with industrial decline, you had a group of artists that saw that there was a lot of electronic waste and that a lot of human potential was being wasted. So what they did is they started collecting electronic waste, they jacked it up with open source software, and they started using this to help people upgrade their skills. Now, this is in an area of a lot of deprivation, but again, self-selection. They don't target people based on their problems. They don't say, okay, this is a space for long-term unemployed. Everyone who's interested shows up, and they socialize people to help one another learn. Now, in terms of efficiency, these guys are recycling, they're using unused, like excess capacity that would otherwise be wasted in the system, the most important of which is human potential. And this is BOY. BOY is a decentralized alternative to emergency response services, like 112 in Europe or 911 in the States. It's set up by and for groups that are ill-served by the mainstream emergency services, like activists. You want to know why that's relevant? Just look at Black Lives Matter, or community service providers, or, anyone you can think of who might not want to call the cops on their friends when something happens, right? So what this system does is it allows any group to quickly direct, when they receive a response, a distress call, to quickly connect the trusted network with that person and help them respond. And a trusted network can be friends, family, fellow activists, advocates. And they do this by putting this on a layer as a layer on top of existing websites. It's also done in a way that each group can customize their instantiation of Boy so that it fits their needs. And what's really cool about this is it essentially distributes the burden of care. So if more people are engaged in caring, you get more care in the system. So these initiatives display a degree of efficiency that's, unparalleled by the public healthcare system. But they're not easily incorporated into the existing one, and the reason is that there is a clash between caregiving and management culture. We'd ask ourselves, why is it that you couldn't do this? Well, especially, why couldn't we do this? Especially since communities caring for one another is the default for humanity. It's only in the 19th century, with the introduction of the pension system by Bismarck, that you start to have this centralized provision of care. And it's not until the 20th century, the second half of the 20th century, that this advanced top-down welfare infrastructure is in place. And yet, when we talk about care systems, especially in Europe, that's what we're referring to. Now, over time, this system has become very complex. And at the same time, you've had scientific culture coming into institutions. This has led to an increased demand for comparison and, control. The story is that this is supposed to be good for us. It's supposed to make us more efficient at using resources. The problem is that it doesn't work particularly well. With care, measuring is hard as it is, but with health and social care, it's even harder. I mean, how do you gauge the effectiveness of a healthcare intervention or medicine? Years of life? No, you also need to look at quality. Basically, this system has developed a very complex variety of coefficients where you weigh these different factors. The problem is they're based on survey data. So they'll ask you stuff like, would you rather live longer or would you like to lose a leg? So, or would you rather go deaf because of this medication or blind because of the consequences of that one? So the problem is if you ask a 20-year-old footballer at the peak of their career, would you lose a leg? I'd be like, no, it would be the end of my life. I would kill myself. You fast forward when they're in their 70s and you ask the same question and, life changes, your perspective changes. In fact, 90% of people asked change their mind when they're in the situation where these questions are actually relevant, which means that a lot of the data used for management decisions is phantom. The second problem is that we tend to think of technological innovation as bringing a lot of new opportunities. It can either be that it lowers costs or it raises the quality, but the thinking is that over time, technology increases the efficiency of the health and social care systems. But you might not know that health and social care is one of the few systems where costs actually rise as technology gets cheaper. And the reason is that with new technological innovation, you get a lot of new opportunities for things to go wrong. So whether it's buggy pacemaker software, or whether it's leaky databases where our patient data is stored, you have problems, and what happens is that the system tries to compensate for them. Administrators want more reporting, they want more centralized control, and you end up in a situation where, as a doctor, you can end up filling in 10 different registries just to prescribe aspirin, and so doctors find workarounds. I've heard stories of nurses hired just to move a mouse every 10 minutes because the software is so difficult to use and it logs out after 10 minutes and then you try to log in. Or situations like where I'm from in Sweden, where if your kids are at a football match and someone gets hurt, as a doctor, you're forbidden from helping. It's okay for everyone else. So this leads to increasing overhead. And, you know, it's meant to make us more efficient. It's meant to make the systems better, but it doesn't. So let's take a case like dementia, which I mentioned before. You know, with Alzheimer's, the aim is rehabilitation. And you know, it's quite tricky because first of all, you have to find out what the person can't do anymore and try to figure out the right tool to help them. For example, if you've had a stroke, if you've had you know, on one side, then you maybe need a cane. If it's both sides, maybe you need a walker. But more importantly, you need to figure out what they still can do. 98% of dementia patients want to be at home. So you need to figure out how to create tools and supportive environments that allow the person to be as independent as possible. But doing this requires patience and attention and time. And this is something that communities are very well suited to do. But large bureaucracies cannot, especially not when you see as a state. You can't look at this granular detail. But these initiatives also have their challenges. Because from the perspective of the person receiving care, you need continuity, you need coherence between interventions, and you need predictability. For smaller initiatives that are fluid and ad hoc, this means that you have to be able to coordinate and you have to have interoperability. And many initiatives are very focused on the one small thing that they're working on. Remember, collective intelligence. People contribute where they feel that they can, when they feel that they can, however they feel that they can. And people running these initiatives are often really stretched for time, and they just don't have the means or the appropriate space for them to, you know, to invest in their personal development, to learn from others so you're not reinventing the wheel. The other thing is that if you want to play with, you know, if you want to interact with the big players, which you have to do if you want to buy medication, big pharma, you have to have negotiating power and you have to have shared strategy. Medicine in other parts of Europe is cheaper in Italy. It's cheaper in Italy than it is in other parts of the world because the Italian state has become much more effective at negotiating. They're the client. Who else is going to buy this medication? But in other places, not necessarily the case. So if these initiatives are to grow resilient, you need to create the incentives and the context where people are sharing information with each other, learning from one another, and building on each other's work. And you need infrastructure to support this kind of community-driven, these kinds of community-driven dynamics. You want to do it in a way that they can complement the existing system, because it is needed, but without forcing them to adapt, you know, the same dynamics and things that make the existing systems dysfunctional. And so this is what Open Care is trying to do. What Open Care is trying to do is it's funding people who are driving these community-based care initiatives. And it's funding them to self-monitor and share this data and make sense of it together with others. And the thinking is that over time, we can develop a framework where these initiatives can build interoperability and a kind of collective awareness. And it's not the first time. So between 2014 and 2015, we ran an early stage prototype in an Italian city called Matera. It's one of the oldest settlements on the planet. So in a collaboration between City Hall and edge riders, we set up something called Unmonastery. So basically what we did is we connected local, creative, citizen-driven initiatives like using OpenStreetMaps in new ways or building a timetable for the bus, something you would think would be an obvious resource that you need, like how are you going to plan your... Not there. And we connected them with peers in an international, networked conversation. Now, what we set up was a kind of residency program where people would move in from different parts of the world, and they would collaborate with their peers in the local environment around building some of these initiatives. And what came out of this was mind-bending projects like teaching 1,000 kids in the local community in a peripheral part of the country to code, or building open source solar trackers. What we saw was that when you provide an infrastructure for people to just get on with solving the problems they care about the way they want to, things come out of this, solutions come out of this that you could never have imagined and that no one could have come up with alone. It worked. It captured the public imagination. We had journalists flying in from The New Yorker, from The Nation, doing features, and we never recorded any of this. We just got on with this. It worked, and we think it's time to think and act and build bigger. So, vision with Open Care, where this is all going, is we want to build the social clinic for the future. What we want to do is we want to build a large-scale prototype based on the lessons we learned and also the fuck-ups we made with the first prototype. And the idea being that this prototype clinic would feed into the research project, adding valuable data, and at the same time, it would draw the lessons learned from the research project to build its services. This is a mad, ambitious project. We can't and we shouldn't do it alone. Open Care is powered by a partnership that already includes the City of Milan, University of Bordeaux, Stockholm School of Economics, CERN's in there somewhere, and makerspaces in Milan and beyond. It's come quite a long way. We already raised millions, 1.6 million in research funding, and there's a lot of space to get involved. We are going to get where we want to go, but with your involvement, we'll get there faster and better. And if you have questions or you'd like to know how you can get involved, just write to me or come up to me afterwards. And if you have detailed domain-specific questions, like for the doctors or whatever, everyone's watching the Twitter feed. So you can use the Open Care hashtag and ask what you want. Thank you. Yeah, are there any questions? I know it's a lot to take in. Yeah, go ahead.
Is it on? Yeah. I wonder, since organizations, when they grow, always develop bureaucracy, and this is your main criticism on the established system, how would you want to avoid that when your organizations grow?
So, criticism I wouldn't say, it's just fact. It just looks like that. Well, self-selection and social networks have a funny way of evading this. So if you are set up in such a way that nobody is in anybody else's chain of command, and most of the engagement is on volunteer basis, you will have filtering. Things that people don't see as being meaningful, they won't engage in. It doesn't matter what the center says, people will just not engage, and your initiatives will die. So there is a social contract that has to be there, and it's a self-regulating mechanism. And then, there are difficulties. Like we just put a post on the Edge Riders blog about all the fuck-ups we made with running an organization, how difficult it is, etc. It's hard, but what's the alternative?
So We in Germany have a very privatized healthcare system, and I see that's a big problem with what you are planning, because let's face it, the German system, the healthcare system, is seriously doomed. What they are doing is ruining everything you are fighting for, equal healthcare system, and we are aiming to privatize more and more. And how do you think you can deal with it? I saw your Greek clinic, and I know actually how it works, but it's completely out of the system. So what's your vision for that? Do you want to be a system out of the system, or do you think you're going to be implemented? And if you're going to be part of the system, how are you going to be part of the system? Just be used for cheap healthcare, or what do you think is going to happen?
So, complexity and emergence is a bitch. So complexity and emergence means that long-term plans, forget about it. What you can do is you can change the local fitness landscape, right? You can move fast, you build a prototype. The smart people who are ambitious and competitive understand that it's better for their individual political or professional ambitions, and they start to shine light on this. I mean, on monastery, that thing hadn't been running for a year where we were asked to include it in the National Development Plan for rural areas. We get ministries of foreign affairs asking us to help them shape their agendas and strategies for foreign cooperation, etc. Joey Ito said to me, don't go head to head with existing systems. Build better, be faster. We're smarter, we're tougher, because we have to be. And, that's all you need. You can get in the game. Who was this? Daniel, someone in the community said, if you don't play the game plays you. Just be smart and trust the people that are around you to be smart too. So that's it. Questions? Yeah, sure.
I think it's really interesting. I think this kind of systems comes mainly into place when the other system fails, and if it's already prepared, it will be smoother when the rest of the stuff goes crashing down. But you mentioned that you want to support somehow the infrastructure that supports these initiatives. Could you maybe a bit expand on that? Because I would like to know more about it.
So we start by understanding what people are doing, why, and which obstacles they're coming across. And in a collective conversation, you also start to see positive externalities, like Prinzessinnengarten in Berlin, right? People think that they're greening the city, or they have one ambition, and then you start to see, hey, but the older people in the community are more active, they're moving around a lot, you start to see data in the healthcare, right? So what we do is we have people self-observe and make sense of things together. And based on that, if you have a shared holistic understanding, you start to build what is needed. So I don't need to know, and it doesn't make sense for me to say what that is. You just create a space where people can make sense of things together, and where there's a real open conversation about how you're doing things while you're doing them. Does that answer your, so we're both from Sweden, right? We have a social healthcare system, a welfare system that is the pride and joy that everyone's citing. In mid-northern Sweden, citizens have occupied a local hospital and are basically doing what they're doing in Greece. They're providing healthcare services illegally because the central entity wants to shut down a service, and it's like 80 miles to the nearest hospital. So this stuff is already happening. All we're doing is just connecting people and figuring out how it can be an alternative. It's going to happen whether you want it or not. It's already there. We see it.
Sorry, I have to be very strict because we're on to the next session.
Okay, cool.
But thanks a lot. I hope you continue the discussion.
Yeah, come find me
afterwards. And